In the summer of 1985, an art professor named Howard Storm was admitted to a hospital in Paris with a perforated duodenum. He was 38 years old. He was also, by his own description, and by every account I've been able to verify, one of the most committed atheists you would have met in any faculty lounge in America. Not the polite kind, the kind that doesn't think about it, the kind where the negation was the position, where he had thought about it, arrived at a conclusion, and organized his professional life around the clarity of that conclusion. What happened to him in that hospital is something I've spent the better part of a year trying to pull apart, looking for the place where it breaks down. I want to tell you what I found, and I want to be honest with you about what I didn't find. Storm was chairman of the art department at Northern Kentucky University. He had a master's degree in fine arts, 15 years of teaching behind him, and a professional identity that he described, and that colleagues from that era have described, as fundamentally materialist. Beauty was a human construction. Meaning was what you assigned to things. The idea that consciousness survived physical death was, in his framing, the great self-delusion of the species. He wasn't cruel about this belief. He simply had it, the way some people have good posture. It didn't require maintenance. It was just the architecture of how he understood the world. He had taken a group of students to Europe that summer, a field trip, studying art in Paris. On the morning of June the 1st, he woke in his hotel with sudden, catastrophic abdominal pain. The hospital his wife got him to was Hôpital Cochin, a major teaching hospital in the 14th arrondissement. The diagnosis came quickly: a perforated duodenum. For those of you who haven't spent time in a hospital, let me explain what that means. The duodenum is the first section of the small intestine, directly below the stomach. When it perforates, when a hole opens in the wall, gastric acid, bile, and partially digested material begin leaking into the abdominal cavity. The membrane that lines that cavity is called the peritoneum. Inflammation of the peritoneum, peritonitis, is what kills you. It is a surgical emergency. In 1985, without rapid intervention, the mortality rate from this condition climbed significantly with every hour that passed. Storm was told to wait for surgery. He waited through the morning, through the afternoon. He estimated, and the hospital documentation supports the general timeline, that it had been 8 or 9 hours when a nurse came in and told him, through the language barrier that was its own particular cruelty, that the surgeon was no longer available. Surgery would have to be rescheduled for morning. He said goodbye to his wife. Not dramatically, practically. He told her he loved her, that he was sorry. She told him not to talk like that. Then he lost consciousness. I first came across Storm's account in the late 1990s in a collection of NDE testimonies that a colleague left in the break room. Not for me specifically, just left there. I put it back without opening it. I had a clinical word for all of it, and the word was efficient. It took about 8 seconds per account. I read Storm's account again in 2020, after my own surgery. After the floor I'd been standing on for 22 years had developed a significant crack. I read it like an investigator. I was looking for the place where it breaks down. Storm described opening his eyes and finding himself standing beside his hospital bed, looking down at his own body on the mattress. No pain. That cessation of pain, sudden, total, from agony to nothing, is one of the most consistent elements across NDE accounts, and it's worth pausing on, because it's not what you'd expect from an anoxic hallucination. Hypoxia produces pain and confusion before it produces anything else. The acute removal of suffering is not the brain's default response to crisis. He was, he said, fully alert, more alert than he'd felt in hours. There were figures in the doorway. They appeared human, male and female, pale, the way figures look at the edge of peripheral vision. They said his name. They told him they had been waiting for him, that they had come to take him somewhere. He said something in the account that I've returned to many times. He wasn't suspicious. His judgment, normally acute, simply wasn't operating. He followed. The hallway extended ahead of them, and they walked. Storm noticed, gradually, something wrong with the light. Behind him, where his room was, there was the ordinary fluorescence of a French hospital afternoon. Ahead, the light was diminishing, not slowly, not gradually, deliberately, the way light withdraws from a space where it isn't welcome. They walked further than any hospital hallway should extend. The figures who had led him changed as the light withdrew. Their behavior shifted. They pushed against him. When he stopped, they crowded him. When he turned to go back, they were around him. And then, in the dark, they began to take pieces of him. I want to be careful about how I say this, because Storm is careful about how he says it. He is not a dramatic man in the way we use that word to dismiss people. He describes this portion of the experience with a specificity that does not read like metaphor or emotional inflation. Not the darkness of depression, not the dread of an anxiety episode. He was in a place, and something was in that place with him, and what it did to him had the specific located quality of physical experience. Sensation with an address on his body. He was bitten and clawed in a space where he no longer had a body. He was mocked in a voice he could understand, even when the sound wasn't language. He fought back. The way you fight when fighting is the only thing remaining, and it accomplished nothing. The beings were not organized. They were interested. That detail has stayed with me. They were enjoying themselves. He described the nadir, and again, I'm using his word, as the moment when he understood that he had arrived at the final condition of himself, that there was nothing below that point, that what remained was what he was, and what remained was not enough. And then, from somewhere that was not his reasoning mind, not his professional self, not the self he had assembled over 38 years of carefully maintained atheism, something surfaced, a fragment, a Sunday school song from childhood. He couldn't reconstruct the words. He couldn't reconstruct the melody. What he had was the emotional texture of it, something about Jesus, something about light and Jesus together. He said the name. He screamed it. He was fully aware, he has said this in every interview I have read, of exactly how that sounded. A committed atheist, at the terminus of himself, in a dark that had taken everything from him, screaming the name of a figure he had spent his adult life explaining away. He said there was no faith in it, no belief, no prayer, no surrender. Just a name, screamed into something that had stopped leaving him anywhere to be. The beings retreated from the word, not from him, not from his effort, from the name. He said it again. They moved further back. He said it a third time. They were gone. And from a direction that had not existed a moment before in that space, from above, or from what functioned as above, there was light. He described it not as illumination, but as attention. Not brightness the way a lamp is bright, but brightness the way someone looking directly at you is different from no one looking at you. The things that had occupied the dark could not remain near it. They were simply gone in the way a shadow is gone when you turn on a lamp. What came through the light, Storm calls angels, and he says immediately, in every version of this account, that he knows what that word costs. He knows exactly what framework it puts him inside. He spent years resisting the word because of what it implies about the whole architecture of certainty he had spent his life building. He uses it because English gave him no better option. He was taken somewhere else. He was shown things. He had something that functioned as a conversation, though language wasn't the medium. He understood, in the way you understand something when you are told it without words, that he was being sent back, that this was not the end. He returned to his body. Emergency surgery was performed. He survived. Raymond Moody is a psychiatrist and philosopher, the person who coined the phrase near-death experience in his 1975 book, Life After Life, which documented over 150 accounts from people who had come close to death or been resuscitated. Moody was the first researcher to describe the core NDE with any methodological rigor, the out-of-body state, the movement toward light, the beings, the review, the return. He also documented, with less popular attention, The range of NDE phenomenology. The experience is not always peaceful. For some experiencers, the landscape they enter is not lit. There is no warmth, no reunion, no sense of expansion into something greater. There is a darkness, and in some accounts, specific hostile presence. Kenneth Ring, a psychologist at the University of Connecticut, and one of the most careful NDE researchers of the last 50 years, studied this subset of accounts extensively. His estimate is that distressing NDEs represent approximately 5% of reported accounts. He notes something important about the underreporting. There is social permission to share a transcendent, peaceful, near-death experience. There is substantially less social permission to describe what Storm describes. The people who come back from the dark tend to stay quiet about it in ways that people who came back from the light do not. Ring made another observation that I keep returning to. The transformation following distressing NDEs, when transformation occurs, tends to be more complete than the transformation following positive ones. A person who returns from a peaceful experience may integrate it gradually, with much of the old self intact, the change happening in layers over time. A person who returns from what Storm describes often comes back with nothing remaining of who they were before. The experience has not softened the old self. It has removed it. Howard Storm was ordained as a minister of the United Church of Christ in 1992, 7 years after Paris. He holds a Master of Divinity from United Theological Seminary. He pastored a congregation in Cincinnati. He describes the man who chaired the art department in Kentucky, who organized his life around the certainty that consciousness was a biological artifact and meaning was a human projection. He describes that man the way you describe someone you once knew who is now gone. I've learned to be skeptical of transformation narratives. There is a strong incentive to overstate change, especially change attached to a dramatic experience. But Storm's transformation is externally documented. Professional records, ordination records, colleagues from before 1985 who have given interviews, students who describe a before and an after that are so discontinuous they seem like two different people. The gap between who he was and who he became is not something he assembled retroactively. It is something that others witnessed in real time from outside. I want to be honest with you about how I've approached this case, about the framework I've been using, and where it stops working. After my own event in 2019, I did what I'd been trained to do. I read the neurological literature, temporal lobe stimulation studies, the research on endogenous compounds released during extreme physiological stress, the hypothesis about REM intrusion into the waking state during crisis, the oxygen deprivation hallucination literature. I could construct a mechanistic account of the out-of-body state, the heightened clarity, the sense of presence, the light. Each element had at least a candidate mechanism or a direction toward one. Then I tried to apply that framework to what Storm describes. The problem is the name. Neurological accounts of NDE phenomenology describe what the brain produces under extreme physiological stress. They describe content, visual elements, auditory elements, the emotional register, the sense of expanded perception. What they do not describe is directionality. What they do not account for is why a specific stimulus, the name of Jesus, spoken by a man who had organized 38 years of professional and personal identity around the conviction that the name meant nothing, would function differently in the experience than anything else he had said, thought, or screamed. I can say it was cultural memory. Residual emotional weight from childhood, stored in parts of the brain he hadn't accessed in 3 decades, activated under extreme conditions. The activation changed his internal state. The changed internal state changed what he perceived. I can say that. It's a coherent account. And then I sit with what I know about how memory behaves under acute physiological crisis. It fragments, it catastrophizes, it regresses, it produces loops and distortions. It does not, in any documented mechanism I'm aware of, produce a named intervention that causes external content to reorganize around that name. The framework explains what was in the dark. It explains the out-of-body state. It explains the light. It does not explain why the name worked and nothing else did. It does not explain why the beings retreated from a word and not from Storm's will or Storm's effort or Storm's pain. The experience didn't respond to him. It responded to the name. That gap has not closed. I've looked at it from several directions now. It doesn't close. Storm is in his late 70s. He still gives interviews. He still paints. His work changed after 1985 the way everything else changed, the subjects and the color and the orientation of it. When I asked him, in a way that was as direct as I knew how to be, what he would say to someone who believes the whole thing was a dying brain producing a final hallucination, he said something I've thought about many times since. He said that man in the hospital in Paris would have been the first one to offer that explanation. He was fluent in it. If any brain was going to produce a last defense against mystical experience, a neurological argument against its own experience, it was his. He'd spent decades building that argument. And what his brain produced, if that's the frame we're using, was not a comforting materialist narrative. It went to the dark first. It was degraded in the dark. And it was rescued by a name it had spent 38 years systematically dismissing. He said, a brain-generating comfort would not have started there. I'm not asking you to adopt Storm's theology. The framework he built from the experience belongs to him. It's a particular Christianity with a particular shape, and you don't have to step inside it. What I'm sitting with is something smaller than that, something more specific. A man who spent 38 years certain there was nothing screamed a name in the dark, and the dark moved. The man who came back is not the man who went in. That transformation is documented from the outside. The medical situation is documented. A specific hospital, a specific date, a specific diagnosis, a specific survival. The before and the after can both be traced. I keep coming back to the asymmetry. 38 years of certainty that the name meant nothing. And then one moment in the dark where it was the only thing that worked. I don't know what to do with that asymmetry. I'm not sure it's my job to resolve it. What I know is that when I try to close the framework around it, when I try to find the mechanism that accounts for why the word functioned as it did, I come to the same place every time. The framework doesn't close there. And I've decided, after a year of looking at it, that a gap that doesn't close is not something I should pretend isn't there.